Welcome! Welcome to Mozart's elegance of being, to Mozart's Concerto, in this case the first movement of the A major K488. It's gracious, is naturally well-wishing and in depth, not on the surface politeness and under something else. It's really genuine gift of goodness that we receive through this expression that drops by thirds and steps in the first theme in the tutti opening. And the second theme, which drops by steps. Like it's a welcoming thing, but almost solacing, almost consolational. Oh, please, come with me, come to this world. It's so beautiful here. Everything is elegance, grace, goodness, well-being, and well-wishing. I think it's a very important feel that Mozart develops about the orchestration as well as the piano part, where everything is thought up. It's not light in music lightness of essence, rather in the expression. Nothing is heavy and downbeat. Everything is and this, then, and this, and this, and then, and this, and then. And how are you, and how are you, and how are we, and where we do, and what we do. It's not joyful, just it's not a jubilational moment. It's more about a moment of true well-being without heavy downbeats. That's what I meant by the idea of thinking up. Of course, from time to time in the piano part you will hear this rambunctious moment where all of a sudden there is an element of such a leap up that is not per se, of course not even at all, some kind of heroism. It's more about probably a laugh, a moment of joy that exults in a jubilation, ha ha, operatically. And this kind of harmony came to Mozart's late young life's late portion of, for us sadly, and for him even more so, because I think this music shows how much he loved life in its idealized version compared to the unfairnesses of the system in which he lived, and which was then very cruel, societally speaking. And I think he found some, of course, recommendation and commissions by the Masons of Vienna, as well as some consolation in a system of organization of society where you don't only fear the religion, therefore the ruler of the emperor or prince or and all that, but also at the same time a desire of human harmony with nature, like his other Masonic piece, which is the famous flute, magic flute opera. Papageno sings with the birds. This kind of idealized harmony between nature and men among themselves as mankind. Oh well, perhaps I'm getting too far away with my philosophizing, but nevertheless, I find that this desire to be away from the drama, the tragic, the confrontational that we have often in his music, would it be in the Requiem, of course, or in Mass, and in many pieces, perhaps even the D minor concerto. Ascending chromaticisms, which is rare enough to be noticed, and not only descending. And you feel that struggle, that expression of inch by inch reaching higher by semi-steps, and then the feeling that in the last movement you prevail. Some more German six than they were in the harmonization. He'll be angry at me, Wolfgang, but nevertheless, I think it was also representative of the times when he wrote in that D minor concerto the middle section of the slow movement, traditionally ABA, but the B is this time a rambunctious toccata style. Section is this docile and smiling. So the operatic effects of dramatic contrast between drama, like in Don Giovanni, concerto translated into a concerto where the operatic effects of this Sturm und Drang, chiaroscuro drama representing the human nature's incredible complexity, and at the same time duality, to say the least, destructive capacity in its passions and its great angers. That first movement of A major is the ultimate wisdom. Be happy. The ultimate wisdom. Be well. Be gentle to each other. And expect that in return. Of course, it sounds very naive, what I'm saying, and it appears to be very much like as if I have lost any sense of criticism towards the reality of the, of course, times in which he lived, and not to mention this kind of very specific 18th centuries Western European dilemma between appearing and being, or faking and posturing. All these masks that they use with the Venetian carnival, where the rich and the poor and the rich mix in a way for a few days to exult away from all this oppression of the poverty compared to the richness, and the fear of God's religion organization, not God but their organization, that made them hopeful, but also most of the people, of course, very oppressed by the rulers of the day, who used religion to their advantage to organize people's behavior and submission. I think that Mozart was not a submitted personality, and musically he always expresses this sense of exulting joy, as well as sometimes the dropping chromaticisms of drama. But in this case, I think the ultimate wisdom of being gentle and the harmony that the Masonic organization of the idealized world that was evoked, he more or less bought that, perhaps just by convenience, because he obtained commissions when he was lacking money, since he never got the job that court composer owned and kept away from him naturally by Salieri, as we know. But he was more successful in popular opera, but not on the state opera. And successful is a relative term. I mean, he earned a lot, he spent a lot, and he basically was constantly in need of new commissions. And so Stadler, the clarinetist, who was his friend, introduced him to the Masonic Lodge, and they introduced him to their philosophy, and therefore commissioned him works which he wrote with 3 sharps or 3 flats is a tonality, the E flat major for the magic flute, A major for the clarinet concerto, for instance, for Stadler, as well as, of course, in this case, the piano concerto in A major, the representative symbolically of the 3 sharps or 3 flats of the Holy Trinity. So all this can be said, and once it's said, it vaporizes in the air, because the music speaks so much more by its own expression and meaning that reaches our hearts beyond this time zones in which it was composed, as if outside of the context of the ecosystem of the time. This music still has the kind of soothing and gentle that brings all of us to be better while we reach to play it. It makes us better, not only as musicians to make it, the air legato 16th notes, decorative patterns. Because the modern piano, thick, rich tone would be too heavy in the decorative powdered patterns over the chorale. And the piano part decorates it. And then, in that sense, chamber music, woodwinds with piano and strings around, is a decorative orchestration, not so much thick strings in the Romantic era's sense of the expression of the melodic line. Here it's more the winds that sing the important parts in the development. Clarinet, then in this case the bassoon also, interplay with the flute, and everything sounds more like a soothing chorale again, and the piano. So clarinet part and play the piano part, you obtain the fact that when the pianist plays the concerto, thinking I'm the soloist in the sense of the 19th century or therefore 20th as well, solo part always ahead, always in the front, always equal to the orchestra, the army of one compared to the army of the group. And in a certain confrontational and then sometimes competitive way, whenever here the piano blends, the piano plays as a piano quintet chamber music with strings around and the winds in the center. this was the concept of Mozart's chamber, what we call it today, music concerti, but in fact it was really the concerto where each of the instruments had an important implication, not diluted by the number of stands, and then the front ones are involved and the ones less in the back. Everybody was sort of participating, very complementary, and the pianist included, but not above them, not louder than them. Well, of course, perhaps that was also because of the fortepiano of the time that sounded more like a harp compared to today's more percussive instrument, but also the fact that he conducted from the piano, so he had in one half of the semicircle the strings, and the other semicircle have the winds, and the audience in the back. So it was really a conductor, pianist, accompanist, continuist, who was sort of, the piano part hyphenates, coordinates the strings and the winds, as if together they blend into one handheld well-being of the mood of the piece, anyway, as it is, but also in the idea that he doesn't give to the piano part the prominent thematic material constantly, as you would expect in the what happens in the Romantic era. But for instance, the second theme he exposes solo on the piano. The first theme is already in the tutti, which is sort of the overture of the concerto opera, opera concerto. And when the piano enters after the overture, it retakes the first theme bluntly, directly. Most of the other concerti here is a little entrance, written cadenza, and then the theme, like in G major or in C major. Concerto, the piano enters with a melody song that comes out of nowhere, except in the daydreaming pianist who is brought to play with the orchestra after the introduction. Concerto, he has, of course, the tutti, playing the first theme, which Beethoven would agreeably borrow in his third, in part, but that's anecdotic side note. Let's say that the opening of the piano part in the C minor concerto is a sad song, oblivious to the thematic material of the overture. As if they have to beg the soloist, oh please, play with us the concerto after you sung your song. Concerto, nothing of that. He just starts directly. I think it participates to the idea that this movement, in my vision, reading, understanding, perhaps misunderstanding for those who wouldn't agree, is that he doesn't try to make this kind of effects of starting with something else and again reaching back to merge into the movement, as if the soloist is this kind of daydreamer who is brought to join the orchestra and then play together in symphony, symphonos in Greek, in agreement, the piece. So therefore this exchange happens with the orchestra elements as well as the tutti as a group, but mostly solo wind players with a flute, a oboe, a clarinet, a bassoon, a horn, and then of course the strings more as a string quartet as a group, but lightly so, because it didn't have at the time the amount of string players army of organized in an orchestra as we hear it mostly in the Romantic era orchestrations and therefore modern music. So in a way, the piano blends with the group. It dialogues, it sings, it becomes more or less an amused spectator of the beauties that are displayed. That's when the piano part plays the decorative part. I insist on air legato. Already Clifford Curzon made me discover the taste of this articulation that allows to connect without to glue, so to say, the 16th notes, decorative, I call them powdered notes. Because it's tempting on the piano to play them very legato, but then immediately it becomes heavy, even if I try to play it soft. And if I play with more air in between, of course it sounds drier, but it's not meant to be alone. It's meant to be together with the pedals of the length of sound that come from the lungs, of the sustained sound of the clarinet, and the flute overlapping, and then bassoon. And over that you hear. So combined, yes, it becomes such a beautiful feel. It's almost like a hot chocolate topping on a vanilla ice cream. Oh, the easy analogies of Naoumoff about food. As if that's the only way to analogize. Well, perhaps it's the only polite way, because all the other senses are in awakening, and probably the sense of tenderness, of excitement and playfulness are also part of it. But it is true that if you play on the modern piano legato, the decorative parts, it's not heavy by the sense of dynamics, but in touch, in texture, it becomes thick. And I think that thickness I want to avoid through the air legato, which I call air legato. My eternal hold and poke exercise. Hold one and poke the next, and obtain independence in the fingers. And then you go rather, or. I find that to be fascinating, by the way, because when you can air legato a long series of bundles like pearl necklaces, you can also choose to do a few a little more slurred. You can go up the scale, more legato connected, and on the way down, more air. And of course, at the time you observe at the same moment how he uses these drops of thirds, as I mentioned at the beginning. And it becomes a little step-by-step scale over the repetitive pattern of the quasi Alberti type accompaniment pattern. The harmonization in 4/16 notes a beat, with passing tones. So Mozart doesn't say to make it 3D. To play, well, he doesn't say anything actually, because he improvised it, barely notated it after publishing it, in order to publish it rather, because he was the pianist, and he probably improvised more complex or perhaps simpler, deceivingly. Who will know? Unfortunately, nobody was there to record decorative patterns. Perhaps he wrote. Well, he wrote what we know, and then perhaps he played. As soon as you try to do something else than what he wrote, it's either too much or not enough. Oh my God, he wouldn't have done that, you would say, stylistically, because today we are out of the time period in which it was written, so we can think he wouldn't have done so much, but not enough. Or sometimes he surprises. Look about what he does in another concerto. Once you learn few concerti, you learned all of them. Not really, they surprise you, but still there are common threads. What is it? The toolbox that he has, the dropping thirds, the octaves with appoggiaturas, or neighboring tones, the descending 6 chords with appoggiatura, the accacciatura from under with inversions. So you can say, okay, I can make a collection of these individual patterns that he used for the pianistic virtuosity of the time, which was his velocity of performance, but the details of which he did not always notate, as he improvised, and he notated after the publication, not after the publication, that would be too late, rather after the performance, I meant, I'm sorry for this. And I think that in that sense, we don't know if he would have accepted to have these articulations of the decorations be so elaborate, and the voice probably not. Probably we have too much time today to decorate, admire, research, go to the source materials, and to rethink about how we're going to shape, articulate everything. In the time, I think they had little time to study all these things. They survived by a commissioned performance next, and most of the time lost in between because he had to be rewritten. It's sort of the ephemeral beauty of a concert performance, which was then the ephemeral beauty of a presentation of a new piece that probably most of the times evaporated after the performance and was more or less written in order to be published afterwards in the format of the detail, into the detail in which it was premiered. Probably not. Probably it was written out in a more standard way for most pianists to play, and the subtleties of some of the designs of the decorations of the piano part that he improvised on the piano were lost forever, and we can always imagine them, but as soon as we try, we can never find the right, well, we can. There are scholars who develop this incredible knowledge about developing the improvisatory aspects through those toolboxes, in a way that I presented earlier, but more than that, of course, into the classical style of Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven. And yes, with a lot of training and love for this time period, of course you can enter in that style and navigate in it with a certain freedom compared to the detailed note of the publisher. Of course, today when you teach or perform, most of the music is published and available, and therefore the capacity of a pianist to play only 18th century compositions is relatively limited. Perhaps it's a research to work on individual research towards performance, on performance practice on original instruments like the fortepianos of Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven's time. But of course you cannot play on the fortepiano of Mozart's time a Scriabin sonata, but you can play a Mozart concerto on the piano on which you also could play Scriabin sonata, which makes then the stylistic differentiation so much more important, because I think that's when you show the culture, the cultivated understanding that you can, out of the same piano, play something very much extracting sounds that appear to be unrelated in the time periods, but you have to define them so that you can have this volcanic more than this. And you have to be able to express it with the same conviction, but with a discerning a palette of articulation that allows you to aggregate it to what you think was the taste of the style of the period. Since we play mostly music of composers of the past who are present while we play them, but even if the instrument is not the one that they used, but we tend to find what makes us magnetically connect with their inspiration. And in different time periods in the 20th century, with recordings that we have now available, people played differently. They were expressing their love for this music with genuine difference of the way we play it today sometimes, or some people. You know, the legato, the pedal, the rubato, the expression, is it too romantic for this? Is not enough for that? Who defines the truth except some teachers and musicologists, of course, scholars? But most of the performers navigate somewhere between I like it, I love it, it means to me, talks to me. Sometimes you study, you learn, you copy, you are influenced, you change opinions after 20, 30 years if you get old enough to re-record it or play it. And after teaching it, you start thinking, I used to play this piece so much. And now I play. It's both an exaggeration. It shouldn't be all slur and swimming in hot ketchup, overly rounded with pedal and resonances, and nor bony cold and kind of articulated dry. Because I think that these excesses reach only a nonsense. Is that we try to imitate something that we don't have, or we lost in terms of tradition, of expression. I think the music played today is for today, with the audience of today, with our understanding of today, or mine personal and yours personal. We don't have to agree. We have to agree to disagree. That we can play it with different points of view. But nevertheless, we play today for today, and it's laughable yesterday like fashion, or is futuristic today and unexpected like fashion too, which is mostly meaningful in the present time. And I find that there are fashions of playing in different time periods that we already have because of the recordings available compared to the originals, which we don't have because nobody recorded them playing then. But it accumulates a lot of layers and layers of interpretational knowledge that overtakes the meaning sometimes of the very connection. Oh, it means to me, I love that piece. It's the middle section of the double concerto by Mozart. And it's a kind of expression of toccata almost style performance compared to the slow movement of this concerto. The only adagio of 27, and it's in a form, a shape of a Siciliana dance in 6/8. So nothing in common between these two. Even Mozart himself expressed enormous amount of contrasting moods in his music, and so we cannot say all Mozart concerti are elegant and all Mozart concerti are rambunctious and all that. Of course, it's easy to say that we have to play contrasting, but we have to play subtly contrasting. And I go back to the opening. Of this very concerto. driven, but without affect, without forcing, without posturing, without. And then the orchestra takes the more, let's say, positive, dynamic drive. There's a dialogue with the many, and you go. Like Papageno tames the orchestra, which would be the animals. And finally, the piano is alone to express the second theme after the very meaningful interruption of the rest. As many writers used to say, the Mozart silences are by Mozart as well. Interruption in the middle of the bar is very typical of Mozart. He doesn't stop on the downbeat, he stops on the third or fourth beats in the middle of the bar. Isn't it? Like as if, in a way, leaving room for the upbeat to the second theme. 4, 1. And in some orchestrations, you can go all the way to the crescendo of the tutti and finish grand, and then subito the tender, introverted second theme, more lyrical, more singing. Well, they're both singing, but this one is perhaps more tender. Yeah, well, anyway, they're both tender. In fact, I'll never find enough adjectives. Not enough subtle adjectives because of my lack of vocabulary in English, but in music I try to find the color, the texture of the legato, the color of the piano, pianissimo, mezzo pianissimo. Start the upbeat from the rest, spawn to the appoggiatura, then drop. And each repeated note have a different meaning. One is the realization of the appoggiatura, and then the other ones are anticipations to the longer appoggiatura, which is in a way more of a suspension. And the descending melodic singing beats. And all this flow that is so tender, simple, but at the same time so subtly sophisticated. And therefore, when you precede it, well, sorry for this very vulgar chord, I played badly. Or perhaps sometimes if you play that chord in the middle of the bar that interrupts and ends in a way uninterruptedly the tutti or the solo part that finishes the first theme demonstration in the exposition, you would think if you play it soft, it belittles it. It makes it elegant, yes, but it makes it also a little bit belittled. Too much. Voiced rather than plucked altogether. The leading tone or the dominant. Slightly arpeggiated. That's too much. Anything not to slow you down, but also to give you that sense of uplifting, which I mentioned earlier about always feeling up. In the texture rather than in the melodic drop. And here is a descending scale and an up chord. So which one do I choose? I would choose the gentle but still uprising chord. And the contrasting second theme. Mademoiselle Boulanger used to say for this kind of things, it's a sense of tenderness. He expresses a sense of emotion, of intimacy, of well-being, whatever you want to say. But nevertheless, at the end, she said, it's mostly what the music itself says, with its own words, in fact, which are the notes and the combinations of the notes and the way they blend in our soul and touch us almost like an arrow of expression that touches us, and we stop anything else just to focus on it, almost like the arrow of Cupidon. Mozart was really the greatest melodist. And the orchestra picks it. The piano decorates it. Toolbox, broken octaves. Minor, major masks of expression that is not really dramatic, not really sad, not really happy and really laughing. It's more about it's not faking minor, it's more about minor but at the second, third degree of intellectual understanding. It's more like in order to have the return, this right leap up of the major, the 6/4, he has a little bit of minor as a tear in a smile, but not a tear in cry. It's just typical of his masks. I would always like to think of that, where he goes quickly from one to the other moods, in a way playfully, but mostly gently in this case. It's not a dramatic contrast between desperation and hope. I don't think it needs to reach that level dynamically, nor in touch. But just a suggestive moment of the appoggiatura, 7/6, 6/5, and then 4/3, and then major. He could have done. That, I don't think anybody would have said, oh, what a pity he didn't do minor. And if he does minor, it shouldn't be all of a sudden, oh my God, it's dramatic. And then happy. Too much on the surface. It's not dramatic and happy, dramatic and happy. Of course, the masks are there, but I think they should be also meant as, what do you think? Well, what do you think? It's very subtle to play this difference of colorization of the tonality by minor and major in such a quick succession without to get too much in the abyss and too much in the heaven. The orchestra asks twice, the orchestra asks 3 times, and the piano answers always until it rises and concludes with a dominant. Well, I threw off my right hand playing the horns in the left hand. Teaches me right to try to play all the parts at the same time. The point of it is that the end of the exposition comes so quickly that you had time barely to hear a gentle first theme and perhaps more imploring second theme, and then a virtuosity of right hand, quick articulations going through minor, major, and then finally conclusively on the dominant. And all this in an amazing unlike my bubble talking, succinct way. Everything is just said in the very few essential moments, included the rests. And when he starts the development of the dominant, this two-part invention by Bach, solo piano, is there to demonstrate both hands, not just the right hand decorative and the left hand playing the, or hinting on the fortepiano, the continuo, while the orchestra plays in the winds the thematic material, and the strings provide the kind of glue to it all, and brings everything to cooking elevation. Everything cooks well, but no, all of a sudden you're alone. With a very, very interesting way of saying, I'm going to make imitations and nothing more. And guess who's going to sing the meaningful melody? The clarinet! And who decorates? The piano. In minor, which is not sad. The flute picks up in brighter C major, which is not that happy, but it is. The pianist is a commentator of what the orchestra sings, the orchestra being the woodwinds. And then finally the piano picks up the theme. Like, I can also sing this part. And then starts the long bundle of articulation, of decoration, while the long voice led spreading and flourishing and blossoming of the winds case. I cannot play all at the same time, I'll just play the piano part. The soloist, as I said earlier, you would imagine that some pianists will involve themselves and say, regardless that I play the decorative part in the whole section of the development, I'm going to be the one to be heard because I'm the soloist. And make out of this decorative pattern something thematic, which in fact is forced. And of course, I personally like very much to just shut down the energy of the dynamic projection of the piano when I play it with the orchestra, and just turn myself to the wind players, which are usually on the left side since there is a conductor in between when we do with a conductor. And then just listen to them play and blend with air legato lightly these patterns. Of course, in some tastes, it is considered surrendering the solo part too much. You could say, yes, it is decorative, but nevertheless it's the soloist, you understand. Reminds me of these recordings of Mozart violin and piano sonatas by Grumiaux with Haskell, where he was, according to people who attended the recording sessions in the 50s, or even earlier, he was going a few steps towards the microphone when the violin part was doing the equivalent of the Alberti, and the piano was having this theme. I'm just making it up, but the idea that he wanted to be heard even in the accompaniment patterns, when in the recording sessions they made so that the violin plays most of the melody, the piano the accompaniment, or Mozart writes most of the melody into the right hand of the piano, and the violin plays, after having exposed the theme, most of the accompaniment too. So they intertwine, they complete, they don't just say divine harp as it became in the later romantic stage of writing sonatas with violin and piano. Well, it's a bit, of course, provocative to mention it so, and diminishing the subtleties, but most of the time that's the case. And you realize that in this case also you do accompaniment and decoration, but you're the soloist, so I have to play myself too. And so you feel like it becomes a little bit of escalation of power play between the soloist, who has this huge coffin, modern piano size, 9-foot instrument, and then feels like all of a sudden it has to be very light. But because it's in the front and the orchestra is in the back, therefore the accompaniment, which in this case it's not, we accompany each other constantly in this groupment of instruments in this concerto. But because it's the usual traditional romantic era onwards setting where the piano is there and the orchestra is on the side and the conductor in between hyphenating, then we tend to play louder this section, which we shouldn't. We should just accept. Just listen. When Mozart was playing it on the piano is what most jazz musicians do today when they have a soloist who plays some section and another section, another soloist, and then another, and then they listen to each other while playing softer, and then they applaud even each other. In other words, you bring a little bit of everybody in the game to participate or partake in this feast, musical feast. And that concept of the chamber music Mozart concerto is obviously harder to implement when you have a larger string group, winds in the back, and therefore the distance with the piano is bigger and they don't hear each other from the stage and the piano. They don't hear the pianist doesn't hear them. Because, well, they each play and they're so distant they don't hear the interaction as if they're playing chamber music next to each other, clarinet and piano, violin and piano. So you have to play in a discerning way to listen a lot, which is why the articulation of the 16th notes by air legato in fact is very effective, because it doesn't abrasively cover the texture of the other instruments, even if the modern piano is more percussively projecting. But therefore this way is shaped so that it doesn't have to overwhelm by its texture the others. And they don't have to force, you don't want to be forcing nor holding back. You just have to play this natural air legato mezzo piano, and I think that's what works the best, in my experience at least. Because I was trying to play for you this bridge back to the return to the recap, which is given to the piano to lead, but is written in many dissectically clearly grouped groups of notes by beat, and so it becomes a bit choppy, a little bit artificial, a bit mechanical dolls kind of wind-up toy, and I would imagine rather something flowing, almost barless is a cadenza. Even if you dream of it, because the orchestra has held sound, especially for the winds, that have to be correctly prepared for the conductor with the anticipated beat before they take the new breath or they finish their breath to the next chord of held sounds. So they cannot overextend nor immediately change their adapting to the piano if it's not evenly distributed by the beats. So between being overly chopped by the beats and completely neither free and totally rubato, it has to give the illusion of the flow, but without the indication of the beats too clearly for the listener, but enough for the conductor to organize this, or for you with the eyes, if you conduct from the piano, to make sure they follow you. way you indicate the subdivision, but you don't play it in your playing. So you don't want to hear that. You try to not want to. It's easy to say, difficult to do, because you have to be free in your spirit, but organized in your count. But don't let the count add accentuations or impulses into the flow of these decorative patterns, which imitate an operatic arias, single vowel sang vocalise. Oh, 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 oh. It's not yet bel canto, so it's more organized. It's not just wait and hear the singer. Well, it is meant, but not that further. That, well, it's that's what it is to define the style, right? It's not just yet, but not totally, and because we've heard more after, we don't want to overwhelm it into the time period of before. So we're trying to be defining all the time what are the parameters of the style while we play it on a different instrument, but we have in our ear heard so much more further than they did ever in their time period when they composed it and performed it. So we have to not only isolate ourselves into the 18th century, but also let some of the expression of the 19th and 20th century music that we perform here in different styles invade a little bit the expression of this without to overwhelm it, without which it becomes anachronistic, not only, but also musically it's tasteless, because it becomes everything and everything is nothing. You have to define more clearly what articulation, what dynamics, what interruptions, what decorations, what phrasing, what freedom, what perhaps rubato within cadenza you can do. Of course, the conductor can be more understanding or more rigid, or the technique of the conductor has to be more specific to allow for the innuendos not to be just very mechanical. All things considered, it has to be somewhere in the middle, not totally free and not totally corseted in beats. It's easy to say, difficult to do, and not to say impossible to teach, but I keep trying. Because I find that ultimately this is what we try to find, is how to fly free while we organized, because we want to be together with the orchestra, not only to be together every beat, but towards an aim of a phrasing direction line. It would be too simple, like in chamber music, just to have every beat together, because then same tonality is the Mozart K526, I think, sonata for violin and piano, and the piano plays in thirds with the violin, and then sixths and above and under, and they overlap, and you have to be exactly precise, without which it sounds. So this kind of blending, this kind of merging is in the articulation, because one is bowed instrument, one is artificially bowed by the imagination and the fingers. If you do 2 and 1, or 3, or 1 and 2, by 2 in the hemiolas, or I mean, you can do subdivisions of different ways if you change different type of bows, or you try and you thought and you have a conductor tell you, and you think about yourself, it would better be if I do this. And so inevitably the piano part has to blend, because it's in thirds constantly together, in this case of Mozart sonata with violin and piano. But in a way, in the cadenza portion with the winds holding, subtly back to the opening without to appear playing 4/4/4 and then 5 on each beat, because then you become obsessed by being together on the beat. Rather, you should be obsessed to be together on the beat in the direction of the line that reaches the arrival point, and then you allow a little bit of navigational I would say parallelism between the orchestra and you. Of course, that happens with experience. You cannot do it right away, because you're afraid you'll be just disconnected from the orchestra, which is the worst fear of a pianist, since they practice it as a sonata by themselves. for ages until they finally get a rehearsal with an orchestra, and it's the moment of an arranged marriage. Oh my God, I don't want to disturb me playing with me. Just play on the side. I'll do my stuff because I'm used to it. Unless if you had a chance to practice it with the orchestra, even by theme, even by section, just the exposition when you learned it ages ago, you would have immediately integrated the expression of how to combine and why the articulation goes well with the strings of the winds and how they combine, how they become your partner. You don't need to pedal and harmonize everything like you do by yourself in the practice room, without which it sounds sort of dry. But all these things happen at the moment of the rehearsal, and you feel like you have to not only not fear to be disturbed by their part parallel to yours, because you have to focus on yours, like singing in choir and holding your ear because the partners who sing a dissonance influence you and you have to make sure you keep your note. This kind of feel has to happen where you open your ears and you accept the other part and you integrate yourself with the other part. So if you could have few rehearsals, it helps to get adjusted, nothing but to play and hear what they do, and they play and they try to hear what you do to the extent of the disposition on the stage, because sometimes, as I said, the distances create distances that are inconcilable, which is why the conductor is there to hyphenate by the beat. And the upbeat and the organization of the preparing the breathing of the winds before the piano, which plays directly on the note, and organize this synergy and this organization of alignment of notes and beats of instruments who don't produce the same type of sound. It's easy to chop vertically the beats. It's difficult to horizontally play layers of elements. It's when you hear it, yes. When you play it, it's more practical to chop it into pieces, but it's better to avoid the accents on the chopped pieces, because then you hear and you try to avoid that in the performance so that you don't have the kingdom of the downbeats. The downbeats are there to be not heavy, but to be bouncing, to go to T4, 1 to T4, 1 to T4, 1 to T4, 1 in the 16th notes by 4. And not, which is exaggerated for the demonstration. Legato, air legato, very legato, or light, or staccato. And all these different ways of quoting this decoration within articulation of staccato, legato, mild legato, air legato, call it what you want, but something in between rather than the over legato slurred and the staccato very chopped, literally staccare in Italian means chopped. How that combines and merges with the other parts. And if you don't have a conductor and you do it from the piano, then you have to hear even more what they do and they hear more what you do. If not, the conductor is there instead of you trying to adjust directly with each other, go through him or her, obviously. The point of the organization at the end is to give the illusion that we all are in this large chamber music cocoon. And nothing sticks out and nothing tries to rule the other. All of us try to just be in it. Recapitulation, once you started, they have the tutti the same way the first time in the exposition. And you pick it up. Second theme in the principal A major versus the dominant E major for the second theme. Therefore, you have to finish not but finish with the dominant of A major and the dominant of E major. Therefore, the moment of shifting in the recapitulation for the memory is when you have the change. That's the first time with a D sharp, and the second time with a D natural, second degree of A major. If you don't take that bifurcation out of the road, then you're going to be in the wrong circle and going back to the opening. Which then with the orchestra sounds terribly bitonal and therefore crashing. So you have to make sure you remember that where is the modulation the second time in order to reach the second theme in the principal key of A major, which is the sonata form's purpose of the first movement with two themes contrasting as Haydn taught them all. And the orchestra, the piano decorating, always gentle. The minor, for not long, the major. Ask you, do you want to do the 3 times? You could try to play a playful FPF, forte piano forte, or piano piano forte, or piano mezzo piano forte, or forte mezzo piano piano. And sometimes I do in performances set something with the conductor. Let's say forte piano forte. Makes sense in a very casual way. Okay, perfect. We know what we're gonna do. And then at the performance, I purposely don't play the dynamic that I decided to do, which in fact interacts with the orchestra. It plays softer, and I go surprisingly, ha! Forte, and then I do piano when it was supposed to be forte the 3rd time. Not all conductors have the sense of humor to react on the spot to this unexpected, playful interaction with the piano part, which in a way I think is the 3 times that Mozart wrote. Why did he write it 3 times? To be the same? Obviously not. Besides that, we don't have today the freedom which they did in the 19th century, no more, but 18th especially, to improvise different ways. I mean, okay, but if you have to play the urtext, at least you can do the dynamics, not to do 3 times the same. And after all, why not 3 times the same too? One has to be open to everything and not arrive with a preset idea. I usually do this, I came up to this because I was taught this, I heard this, I was understanding that, I think that this is supposed to be, and then you arrive with your certitudes. And you want to not be assertive. I mean, of course you need to expose, implore, and then perhaps at the end of it implement your interpretation. But you're not alone. And so you have to argue, and if not discuss, and at the best interact with the conductor and the orchestra and say, what do you want to do? Besides, it comes twice because it's also 3 times in the exposition. So you hear it 6 times, which is beautiful. Why, it's never enough. But does it have to be always colorized? Because is it so boring if it's played the same way? Perhaps. You see, you enter in this kind of detail for interpretational choices, decorative choices, but no, but yes, but I'm not allowed, but I should, but it depends, but when and who, how, in which context, and then finally you say, after all, it's written, I'll play like it's written. It's beautiful like it is. I don't have to question it. If Mozart wrote it 3 times, it had a meaning. Of course, in an opera would be different dialogues with different words. In the piano, it could be differently because of the direction you can give the articulation. Staccato, legato, and staccato, or forte and piano. So you do the contrast of dynamics or the contrast of textures, or combined, and which and when and where and how, and do you have to plan or do you have to just accept to let it happen as your fancy goes on the spot and make it into some kind of a moment of distraction, playfulness in the true sense of playfulness, not organized, counting, worried, will we be together? Of course, that is the base necessity, but above that, you can allow a little bit of fantasy or fancy of something that is not acted and overstated, because it's only a decorative tonal bridge moment. It's not exactly necessarily defining the concerto's expression, but it is part of these things that you have to define in your interpretation, and then accept to be flexible when you interact with the orchestra, the conductor, if they give you another idea. We always worry if we play 3 times the same that it'll be boring, and I don't think it's boring. I think it's sometimes a necessarily good restatement. Look at the second theme. He expresses it the first time. Explicit of its mood in a descending scale. What does the orchestra do? Right away they say, they restate it. So there is a necessity humanly to restate something like a term of endearment. I love you, I love you, I really love you. And it sometimes, of course, helps to have the words, which the piano doesn't have. It's not an opera with words, it's an opera with innuendos of words, because of the effects of the melodic lines that you usually hear in operatic arias of Mozart, where you know that if he does an opera poggiatura around the third, it's a tenderness. Caro mio in Italian opera, my dear. And then something more driven, more heroic. Well, it's hinted, it's not detailed, and it shouldn't be. After all, sometimes you hear the opera with the words without to listen to the words, but you know the meaning. But you hear the melody more, but if you know the words and the melody, you understand innuendos. So you can hear it at different levels. On the piano, it's like opera for a mime. You express it only through the leaps and or the phrasing or the dynamics. And so you can quote it in these different expressions, but at the end it's essentially what it is itself expressing, which is the leap of a melodic line or a drive of a fast group of notes. And he interrupts the same way in the middle of the bar as he did in the exposition before the first theme. And this time the piano solo plays the quartet version of the what I call Bach-style chorale. Little solo sections that comes only in the recapitulation for this theme, in the piano part, with the length of sound of the modern piano, it sounds really like the chorale because you don't have the quick decay. So in a way, the vocal aspect of SATB that Mozart writes in a Bach-style 4 parts chorale becomes more explicit in the modern piano, paradoxically, than on the fortepiano it would have been, because of course it depends also the tempo. You cannot play in this slow tempo. You still have on the modern piano the length of sound. Of course it's out of tempo and out of style, but you still hear it. I have to play. When the first time we heard the theme in E major, you have the strings, you have the winds, you have all the held sounds either by the lungs or by the bow, and that creates with a vibrato a sense of continuum of the sound that imitates really vocal, singing SATB choir style. And when the piano plays it in the recapitulation, it's out of character, it's lower than the decorative. It's really, you become it. And nobody decorates you, you just play it alone. And the orchestra listens to you. And they pick it up after you, and you do the decoration to conclude. To sing the horn part, but I almost ran out of breath since I don't have any good lung support. But all of a sudden you realize that the orchestra wraps it up with the piano as a decorative element after you had this little moment of solo choral playing for the piano solo part. But alone, literally solo, not as a soloistic part and the orchestra accompanying, rather in decorative way, complementing when the orchestra picks it up, and concluding with these driven scales. And the left hand with the broken octaves with the poggiaturas. This is what I was saying earlier about the toolboxes for this kind of mechanical, virtuosic velocity writing of Mozart, who uses a lot of these patterns that in many concerti. Triplets to slow down the expression. Diminished seventh of he starts first movement almost together, though he hasn't yet started a concerto with the piano first, but of course he will never since he died. But he got close enough to in the 271 Jeune Homme concerto. The piano interruption. Of course, Beethoven in the fourth concerto will innovate by starting literally with the pianist before the orchestra. Nevertheless, towards the end of the first movement, they all don't differ. They all have a cadenza, written, either improvised by Mozart, written for somebody else, improvised if performed by himself, and then notated in the publishing company, but not unless it was for somebody else. In this case, we have the chance to have his cadenza, but of course that was the moment where you expected in the time period, in the time when all performers were interpreters, but also composers and also sight readers and also chamber musicians. Basically, there was no difference in professionalization. It was all kind of one tool for all musicians who adapted to read music together, to compose music, to perform music. Perhaps there was no competition so much on the interpretation side, because music had to be produced so fast and at the same time consumed so fastly, so that it was this kind of dailiness that decided of the survival of the composers who had to furnish new music when they had a job or a commission. And that music, of course, evaporated after it was performed. Therefore, I think in that sense, the improvisation was sort of the perhaps I would say for Mozart specifically, it was almost as if it was his way of making a first draft in real time in front of the audience. He was sketching it, and then thoughtfully he rewrote it differently, or perhaps more meaningfully than on the spot when he had to publish it. And the publisher asked him, could you please fill up the piano part which you left blank, because he only composed in real time the orchestra parts, and his friends copied before the performance in real time each orchestra page, and then the performance he improvised. It was all side-read with his friends who were chamber musicians and composers each, and could figure out the mistakes, perhaps even anticipate them, the simple copyist mistakes that happen inevitably. Since they didn't have time, a luxury to have rehearsals and interpretations, they just had readings and performances all together. And therefore the improvisation was part of the composing, perhaps like thinking loud voice interpretation, and that's why the cadenzas came up as the moment to free, let the spirit fly away from you and say, now that I've exposed to you my first and second theme, my development, my recapitulation, we've done the decorative elements, we've done the dialogue elements, we have the original overture of the tutti in the orchestra in the traditional way, the piano entered, everything was stated. So before we conclude on the 6/4, we're going to have a cadenza. With a trill, which is sort of the expected system for the orchestra to pick up and figure out that it has a start. Sometimes perhaps he surprised them by finishing rather than, but that we won't know. Or we could guess. In that playfulness, especially if you have enough reactivity with the chamber musicians with whom you play, who are all composers themselves, and so you're playfully exchanging like tennis players or ping pong players, and you test, you try, it was so much more lively, and today it's so much academic because it's published, recorded, taught, and sometimes we are more rigid and we have to know how many beats you're going to do on the trill. And if you're surprised with the 4 and 2, oh my God, now how are you gonna do 4 and 2, 3 and 3, 4 and 4, 2 and 4, and what is most guessable? Not always. Not everything is caricatured when I demonstrate it, because for the purpose of the demonstration, obviously, there are very subtle musicians who accept to do 4 and 2 and do it with conclusive and compelling drive. And I think that in the rest of the cadenza, you can play a bit of that minor, a little bit of that major, a little bit of that scale, a little bit of the second theme hinted. But most of the time, like in this case, when he composed himself the cadenza, he didn't try to do something elaborate, something where he'll put 2 themes of the same on top of each other and do of them or something, which is so tempting to do when we have the time today to improvise or compose rather a cadenza, and we can try to organize this, some drastic modulations and some superimposed contrapuntal systems which are very clever. I don't say it's wrong, actually it's exciting if you can, but the point is, should you? And at the end of it, when you look at Mozart's cadenzas, either because you consider that he wrote it for others who couldn't play well enough, he tends to write simplification rather than complication in his cadenzas, material texture presentations. No stretto like in a Bach fugue with an element of the line that will come in augmentation and something else. Now, perhaps he improvised it like that. Perhaps people appreciated hearing his virtuosic, improvisatory, contrapuntal polyphony. But when he wrote the cadenzas, he writes them relatively simple. I myself committed some of those sins when I tried to, like the first theme of the C major, and the second theme. I mean, okay, you can do more complex than that even, and I did. But the point is that I find that when I play Mozart's cadenza written by Mozart, I find that the simplicity is the beauty. The final wisdom is happiness in this first movement, and the final complexity is simplicity. That's easy to say, difficult to accept or to present. It's not to simplify, it's to reach to the essence. And he just a scale. And then a diminished seventh arpeggio. And then a scale of A major. Surprisingly, deceivingly going to this diminished seventh, 5 of 2. In B minor. The A major becoming minor also. And then flat 6. 6/4 on 5. And the diminished seventh of F sharp 4 or sharp 2. So you would say, oh, it's deceiving. It's just simple. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't develop, he doesn't play, he doesn't organize, he doesn't chop and superimpose, he doesn't try to present the theme in different aspects. He doesn't do like Bach in a stretto of a fugue. But he doesn't. I think he keeps the lightness of the mood of the movement. Of course, the slow movement will be an incredibly sad song that will go to depths of human soul that are rarely reached and trigger some tears from us, especially when the voices come. But that contrast is the jewel in the middle of the case, which would be the first movement that holds the jewel, and the third movement, which would be the outpour of simple, but this time operatically demonstrative joy, not like the first movements contained, elegant and well-being. Some kind of exaltation, of jubilation. Let us all dance, all be happy, let us be happy. And musically you have less of the second theme of the first movement, contrast, and you have less of the statements of the mind and the soul and the spirit, which are in the contrasts of the two themes, sonata form, first movement. And of course the sad song in the slow movement, and the third movement just jubilational dance, or if not dance, at least very intrepid fast tempo of exaltation that brings us to prevail. I think it's a beautiful contrast between the first and third movement, because even if you have F sharp minor, relative minor in the third movement, it's all about playing it in virtuosity, not because it's sad like the second movement in the same relative minor, F sharp minor is incomparable, but still. Since it's a rondo form, that's the ABAC, and then the other section is a subdominant tonality. Whichever way. that the last movement is a continuum of exulting, happy, driven, joyful tutti sections with piano that embarks to in a contagious way to bring them out of this sorrowful sadness of the slow movement and of this elegant and very organized first movement, in a sense of third movement being a little bit more free-flowing and less organized, or appearing to be more spontaneous. Boy, is my left hand loud. The Alberti became very, very, very fat. That's better. You see, you can never give up on trying to improve. It's constantly to be rebuilt, to be done. It's Sisyphus on the rock. Every time you drop from the mountain top, you're the rocks, you go right to try again. And in the middle. For some will be too fast, for some will be too slow. If it's too slow, it's difficult to maintain the flow and the phrase. But the meaning is more meaningful than the tempo. Neapolitan 6 of desolation and then return of sharp minor. Of course, you could think it of written as a trio for the piano is alone, as an aria. And the length of decay of the modern piano allows for this stretch to more adagio, at ease in Italian for adagio. So now you can stretch it stylistically, antagonistically with the original idea on the fortepiano. Becomes spelling bee, word by word, letter by letter, syllable by syllable. But to rejoin the idea of the Siciliana as a dance, long, short, quarter eighth and dotted 8/16. And also it depends of the first movement. Abyssal sadness of the 6/8 and the bar beat 4/4 jubilation. And I think there is the trilogy between the three moods: the gentle, the sad, and the rejoicing. There's not only Holy Trinity in the three flats or sharps on the key signature, it's also the three movements. And in a way, it's a mini opera where the aria is in the slow movement, but you also have aria in the second theme of the first movement. But all that without libretto, without script. And the script is only what the music hints us that it is, compared to what it usually does when it's an opera. The moods of drive, the moods of expression, of introspection, the moods of daydreaming, the moods of gentleness, or just the little nothings that make the bridge in between the sections. I think everything is precious in Mozart, we all know that. The rests, the decorations, the bridges, the amazing melodic themes that are just unforgettable, like fragrances of a perfume, of a flower, of a gaze of somebody loved. It's just all these unforgettable moments, and it's succinct enough so that when it's finished, you start either whistling it on the way out from the concert hall because it's sort of entered in you, and you become it through a melodic element of it, or you appropriate it as a performer if you can play it, or a conductor if you can conduct it, or musicians who have to participate to it, more or less obliged in the orchestra, not always by choice, because it's not really chamber music either, because it's really a concerto, but concerto da camera, I would say, chamber or concerto, in the musical, meaningful sense of sharing everything and not putting oneself further out more than necessary, even if you're the soloist. What a gift we have received to transmit ourselves of Mozart, regardless if stylistically we understand it differently in this time period than another, if we think it's faster, slower, bowed by 2 by 4. Everybody at some point comes in front of the score and looks at it and says, this is what it means to me. Fine. We all are here to pass in front of the score and share it with our audiences in marveled. The music will be as it was before us now, and it will be after us too. The beauty of it is that we don't only play music of our time, but we play music of their time as if it is our time, outside of our time of dailiness. The dailiness of our time has nothing to do with this gentleness of the first movement. But it's nice to be plunged in it. It almost feels like we enter in a role as an actor and we believe in it. We don't just act it as a make-believe. We become it the time we are it. And this kind of articulation, details, or tempo choices have to do with how we're going to inhabit that character of this operatic illusion on the piano concerto, or rather evocation of opera on the piano concerto format. It blossoms into us forever. It's like a gift that keeps on giving. It makes us always try to improve in order to reach this highest level of refinement that we find in its details as well as in its contours or in its essence. It's elegant always, inside out, outside in, upside down, downside up. You don't have really hidden things to put in the closet. Everything is there, beautifully exposed, and you participate to some kind of harmonious organization of idealized society of humans exchanging among themselves. Thank you, Mozart, and thank you to you.